Today we're making a simple 1x1 raccoon. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna divide two faces that are next to each other like this in 3 sections. And then we're gonna remove this edge using these lines. This is gonna be the bottom of the raccoon, which is why we're gonna take this off and make it flat. And that can be done with a few rough cuts. Next we're gonna make this kind of an oval shape. So we're gonna take a little bit more wood off the sides compared to the top. Almost a circle, but not quite, since we wanna leave some of this height. Just something like that. And then we can make these remaining edges round. Except for these ones, of course. Something like this is good enough for now. We have a lot more roundness, and then we have this flat bottom. Next we're going to divide this in half, like that, and then we're going to divide this in 3, something like that. Now these 2 sections is where the tail is going to be. Now the tail obviously doesn't need this much thickness, which is why we're gonna make it slightly slimmer, something like this. So not quite 1/3, I'd say slightly over half of the thickness that it has right now. Then we can slim it down later. So that's what we're gonna start with. So now we need to remove these 2 bits of wood from the sides. So now we can just make sweeping cuts starting from this line. So we cut away these 2/3 of the rear end half. So I'm just twisting my knife like this. I think the rough cut version of the sweeping cut is the fastest. So that's what I use to remove most of the wood. And then this push cut version can be used to make the inside curve tighter so that we can take away this wood over here. That's good enough for now. Then we're gonna make a basic side profile for the tail, and it's gonna be as thick this way as it is this way, so that means a square over here. And then we make a curve that connects to this halfway point line. And this is like a very shallow S shape. So we have an outside curve here and an inside curve here. Something like that. And now we can make some more sweeping cuts. Like that, and then we can make this corner round so that we get that outside curve. And for that, these push cuts work very well. Next we're going to divide this front half in half. Then we're going to divide this section in half the other way around. And now we're going to make some sweeping cuts from this point to this point. We're gonna make a curve like this. Like that. Next we're gonna remove some mass from over here, and that can be done by dividing this in 4 and removing this top quarter. And this center line is where the highest part of the raccoon is going to be. So we want to create a curve like that. So again, I'm doing this with sweeping cuts. That's good, and then a few push cuts over here. And we have a very nice curvature. Then it's time to slim down the head quite a bit. Here on the front, I'm gonna draw 2 lines like that, starting from these two edges that we just created with the sweeping cuts. And now we're gonna make similar sweeping cuts to the sides. So we want to connect these parts smoothly to the same point. That is the highest point. It's also gonna be the widest point. So we're gonna do a similar thing as over here, but on the sides. Like that. And now we can divide this in half and make the first half pointy. We can leave a little bit of roundness on the tip of the snout. That's good. And then we need to make the snout pointy from the side too. And for that I'm dividing this in 3 and removing these 2/3. This is just a straight push cut. Next we're going to carve the in-between area between the hind limbs and the front limbs. I'm going to redraw this center line over here, and that is where the hind feet are going to end. Right in the center. But then the gap itself over here is going to be about 1/4 of the entire height. So I'm dividing this in half and then again this in half. And this is how high we're going to cut. And the shape we're looking for is going to be something like this. So we leave a little bit of space here for the front paws, and then over here this line starts slightly higher because here are going to be the paws of the hind limbs. I'm going to draw this on the other side too. Just by looking at this from this angle, it can be made decently symmetrical. And then we're going to start by making a stop cut over here where the hind paws are going to be. So I'm pressing the blade into the wood. That's good. Then I'm gonna make a few sweeping cuts so that I can get a better place for this V cut. And then when an inside curve starts forming, we can change these into V cuts. And now these cuts on the side of the hind limbs are gonna require a little bit of a sweeping cut motion so that we can make this straight face over here, because otherwise we can't really fit in there. So here close to the paws it's a sweeping cut, and then here it turns straight. Next we're gonna make a similar V cut, except this one is gonna be easier. We're gonna make it here between the tail and the hind limbs. But the hind limbs are gonna require about twice as much space as the front limbs, maybe even a little bit more. Something like that. And then from here, we're gonna draw something like that. We have a straight line here, and then we have an outside curve for the tail. Next we have a lot of rounding to do. But there are some areas where we want to leave sharp edges, and they are on the bottom here. So we're not going to touch where the paws are going to be, and then over here we want to leave enough space for the ears. Other than that, we can take away all of these sharp edges and make things a little bit more round. So for example, over here I have these unnecessary edges. The front limbs should flow more smoothly like that. And then I can make these edges round too. And actually this one is also something that we're not going to touch yet. over here on the sides, we need to turn this V cut of the stomach smoothly into sweeping cuts. Something like this is good enough for now. Next we're going to create the paws. So we're going to make a small V cut over here. I think it's easiest to make a little place for it like that with very tight sweeping cuts, and then we can turn that into V cuts. These V cuts are also going to go a little bit to the sides like this. And then I'm going to recreate a little bit of that inside curve over here so that this is not just a straight line. For this, it's important to use the tip of the blade because we can't really cut this way due to the grain of the wood. And the entire blade, well, obviously depending on the blade, but most blades are not going to fit here very nicely, which is why to get close, I'm using the tip of the blade and making these small sweeping cuts with just this part. That's good enough for now. Then we can make some V cuts around the tail, not on the top, just on the sides and on the bottom, so that the tail gets a little bit slimmer closer to the body than it is over here. Next we're going to separate the feet from each other with a few V cuts. Here on the front we can make a few V cuts with the very tip of the blade, and then we can make the paws just a little bit rounder. Then we need to make 2 more V cuts on the sides of the hind limbs. They're going to be downward like that. This will separate the feet from the rest of the leg slightly more clearly. I'm also making this inside corner between the paws and the rest of the leg a little bit sharper. Next we're going to work on the head. And the ears are going to be slightly more back than they are now. They're going to be about the halfway point between the tip of the nose and the front paws. So about there. So I'm going to make a few sweeping cuts over here. And now we already have a pretty good start for the ears, but we need to remove some wood from this in-between area too. Just a few sweeping cuts like that. Then some push cuts to make the forehead round again, and then some sweeping cuts down here where the snout is going to be. And these sweeping cuts are going to be extended to the sides. They're going to go towards these corners. And the basic face shape of a raccoon is starting to form already. Then we need to make the snout slimmer from down here too. Then the underside of the snout is going to be upward facing like that. But the basic idea with the head shape is just that we make sweeping cuts from all around so that we get this kind of a shape for the snout, a wide face, and a slim snout connected by 2 inside curves. And then we have these sweeping cuts on the sides where the eyes are gonna be. And here I'm making the upper part of the snout a little bit rounder and smoother, and the lower part too. If this feels tricky, it might help to look at some photos of raccoons. Now we can connect the forehead further over here with some sweeping cuts that are made between the ears, like that. And then we can start making the back side of the ears with V-cuts. Now I don't want to go too close to this front part yet. It's then easier to change the location of the ears slightly if I need to. But the important thing is that we get to remove some of this thickness from the neck, because that will then help us understand the shape a little bit better. On the sides, the shape is something like this, and we can carve that shape with V-cuts. Next we're going to work on how the face looks from the front. So over here we need to make some V-cuts so that the sides of the face are not just straight, but there's an inward corner between the ears and the rest of the face. Something like that. And then we can make all of this a little bit rounder. Even this corner can be made slightly rounder, like that, and then there's too much mass over here on both sides. The ears are pointing slightly to the sides, and the shape is going to be like a rounded out triangle. So the ears need to be pointy, but not sharp. So you just need to take away some mass from the sides and the back in order to get something a little more like this. And then you can straighten the front side of the ears like this. And now we're pretty much done. The only thing we need to do is iterate on the previous steps. Over here, the bump of the forehead is still too big. In my case, this part of the face should be more slanted. Alright, that's quite good. So over here we have just a smooth, pretty round curve. Then the snout itself takes a little bit less than half of the entire length of the head. So if you divide this from this inside curve, that's going to mark the black areas on the face. The snout is about half, but then also these brows are pretty much in the middle between the tip of the nose and the front of the ears. And then this body shape is still quite chubby. The goal is that the raccoon's body is higher than it is wide. The neck can also be made quite a lot thinner. Now there basically isn't any neck. So by taking away some of this mass from the sides, we create a little bit of a slimmer structure. I'm gonna even take this down a little bit so that this part of the body is clearly the highest part. I'm still making this inside curve on the sides to give the body a little bit more shape. So just something like that to separate the legs from each other a little better. Don't worry if you don't get the proportions quite the way you want. These kinds of adjustments are a skill that will develop with time doing more and more projects. But for now, it's already enough if you can make all of these cuts. And then with a little bit of paint, it's definitely gonna look like a raccoon. And that's it for the project. And now that this is done, I'm gonna paint this with some acrylic paint. And if you haven't seen that video of mine about painting these figures yet, click right here to learn how to do that.